It was my last semester of college. I was walking home from school when I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. He beat me so badly that I lay on the ground, unconscious when he was done with me. The next thing I knew, I met a wonderful young lady who made my heart skip a beat and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After 2 years of dating, we got married. Almost immediately, she bore me a daughter. I then pursued and obtained my dream job. My wife was able to work from home while caring for our baby. When my daughter was 2 years old, my wife bore me a son. My son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and dote on him and my daughter. It was my dream life. Eventually, years passed. One night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when something caught my eye. The table lamp. I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, inverted almost. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim on 4 legs and a white square shade. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. My wife asked me to come to bed with her. I refused. I stayed up all night staring at it. It just wasn't right. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Something was just so terribly wrong about that lamp. I stopped eating. I left the couch only to use the bathroom at first. Soon I stopped that too, as I wasn't eating or drinking. I stared at the lamp for 3 days straight. My wife became very worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. By this time, my cognizance was breaking up and my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp was not real, but how could it not be real? As I stared at it, the lamp began to grow wider and deeper. It still appeared to have inverted dimensions. It took up my entire perspective, and all I could see was red. I then heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and I became aware of pain. An unthinkable amount of pain. Before I knew it, the words, "I'm missing teeth," came out of my mouth. I then opened my eyes. I was lying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I didn't know. Many were freaking out. I was completely confused. It was then that I realized not only was the lamp not real, the house was not real. My wife, my kids, none of it was real. The last 10 years of my life had not been real. At some point, a cop scooped me up, dragged and walked me across the sidewalk and grass and threw me face down in the back of a cop car. I was still confused. I was taken to the hospital by the cop, as it seemed he didn't want to wait for the ambulance to arrive. I was examined and given CT scans, but I was okay, at least physically. I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving the loss of my wife and children, who never even really existed, struggling to cope with the pain of the loss. I was scared that I was going insane. I would cry myself to sleep every night, hoping I would see my beautiful wife, the love of my life, in my dreams. To this day, I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old and I can never hear what he says. Today, I am still devastated.
A few years ago, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board, which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space, lay fractured in 2 pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I checked out the area, but no one was there. Anymore. I emailed pictures to the landlord, asking if anyone had been up there with an undertone of annoyance, since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called and she explained that her last two tenants had said that the same exact thing happened when they had been living there. My landlord promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night at around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone had been rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There is no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw it. The new board covering the hole was broken in two. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped. But then I heard something else. Whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices. I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. "It's your turn. It's your turn." Unable to bring myself to check up there, I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal and tried my best to drown it out and go back to sleep. By 5 a.m., I decided to watch TV as I could not fall back asleep. Then a fuse blew. My pet budgie, Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sorts of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, it comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh, wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I had not been someone who believed in ghosts, but for me, this confirmed that my apartment was haunted. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live elsewhere now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on there, but I refused. It's their problem now.
I live in a historic part of upstate New York, and there are a lot of places that people like myself like to visit that are abandoned, spooky, or off limits. In my hometown, there are 2 large cemeteries that everyone and their brother has gone into at night one time or another. We have one, though, that is infamous. Townies go there to drink and get into trouble. This cemetery carries felony trespassing if caught by police. There are tons of rumors that ghosts, demons, and mental patients from the 1920s still roam the 22 acres of rolling hills. Some say that Satan himself hangs out there just to scare dumb townies. There is a 1.5 mile walk from the road back through trees on gravel before you even get to see the cemetery itself. Along the road are caved-in rocks that wannabe witches and Satanists lit candles in to rebel against society and their parents, they say. I did my research on this place because I had heard so many rumors and wanted to see it for myself. So I convinced my then-girlfriend Sarah and some of our friends to venture in. We planned for a Saturday night to park our car in a neighborhood, walk a bit to the road, and walk in around the gates from the woods. That Friday, I was at a party with my friend Jack, who I was telling my plan to, and he listened to my zeal. As I kept talking, he started to get this really worried look on his face. I finally asked what was wrong. He told me that about 10 years prior, he and some friends went in there to party, get high, and drink. They made it to the center of the cemetery, and it was all overgrown at the time. They made a fire and started doing their thing. Later in the night, he and another guy passed out. They were then woken up to men in hoods who threatened to slit their throats. He recalls kicking one guy and taking his knife. He recognized that the hilt of the knife was made out of animal bone. He shoved the other hooded guy hard into some brush and picked his friend up off the ground. They ran to the road while being chased by at least 6 others. He said as they made it to the road, a state trooper was passing by, and he and his friend surrendered themselves to the cop. The cop revealed to them that there was indeed a cult they were after, who were reportedly living there. They had killed at least 3 people over the past couple of years, he said. The cop told him and his friend that if they ever found themselves in the woods and heard animal noises or any non-human noises that weren't quite right, it would be smart to leave immediately. The cop gave them a ride to their car and ended up letting them go because of how badly they were shaken up. My friend ended his story by cautioning me. He advised me to be super careful if I were to go through with my plan. Letting curiosity get the best of me, I went anyway. I would be armed with some friends after all. So we ended up going. When we got to the main trail, my girlfriend and her friend were in the middle, and me and my buddy Jason were in the front. 2 others were in the back. We jumped a few times because we'd see a shadow run here or there. Or if we stopped, we could see shadows running between trees, which I wasn't sure were real to begin with, even though I was eager to see something. We got to the last part of the trail. We were all deep in conversation when we heard a loud whistle come from deep in the right side of the woods, followed by a similar whistle from the left. As we walked, more whistles ahead and behind us rang out loudly. I spoke out, saying we should go no further. Jason began questioning me, arguing that we made it this far. He did not want to turn back now. I told him that what we were hearing was not ghosts or animals, but people. I told him that the sounds were people with bad intentions. He started to really give me some static, but my girlfriend and the rest of the group backed me up. They were scared. I urged him to turn back with us and forget this whole thing. However, he ignored me. He started walking ahead when we all heard them whistle out again, but this time a little closer. Before we knew it, Jason came running frantically back to the group. He said that he had seen someone in a hood in the woods. We all agreed to walk back as quietly as we could, so we started to lightly jog to the road without cutting through the woods. Instead, we ran right out onto the road and followed it until we got to the car. Out of all the research I did on that place, the best advice I got was from a friend. His advice ended up saving mine and my friends' lives. I didn't know what would have happened if those people had caught up to us.